Let's call to order the Electric Advisory Board meeting. It's Monday, May 5th, 5:30. Please stand for the invocation and the pledge. Lord, give us wisdom and discernment. Help us to make good decisions. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business is approval of the minutes for the meeting held on April 7th, 2025.
Motion to approve?
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. All right. Presentation, fiscal year 2025-26 budget.
All right. Good evening, everybody. So this month and next month, we're going to talk about the fiscal year 25 budget. This evening, we're just going to talk about revenues. So we'll kind of break it down for you. The primary reason for that is we don't have all the expenses in yet. And we're on the bubble with the revenues. So you get, you're right in the middle of the mix here. So whatever input or questions or whatever you have, let me know. So let me, if this, of course, this isn't working now. This one? Turn it off. There we go. All right. We should, energy is everything. There you go. So as far as our revenue discussions tonight, I wanted to review just a few things for you. Talk about electric rates a little bit, electrical rate comparisons, and that kind of fits into the revenue category. I want to point to some standard electric bills that the city sends out to customers, so you kind of see where we're at and how that refers back to it. We'll talk a little bit about the power adjustment, then we'll break down into revenues, and then we'll get into some of the cash reserve levels as they are now. Actually, cash reserve, I think that chart was February. So that's about as much as as update as snapshot we can get right now. So our rates are pretty simple in that, if you recall, there's two kind of forms of your rate, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit too when we get to the electric bills, because you'll see it there a little bit better. But we kind of have the fixed rates, which we set by resolution every October 1st, and then we have the power cost adjustment. So this is the matrix that's adopted by the City Commission on an annual basis that fixes the rates, and these are all the typical rate classes. RS stands for residential, commercial, ND is commercial, non-demand. I think MUN is municipal. We have special rates for us, municipal, and you see it down there again. You see municipal. I was going to point over here, but you all are looking up here. So municipal, so non-demand is a typical like customer load that doesn't have a demand component to the billing. Municipal, ND, non-demand, commercial demand, and then there's three phases of demands: commercial demand, GSD 1, 2, and 3, then municipal, and then we have our fixed BCPA it's not fixed. That obviously it's rolling right now. It's at 2.5 cents a kilowatt. And then I put on there too some of the taxes that get paid on the bill. And so when we get to the electric bill section, you kind of see where those come into play. So these are our electric rates. Typically, the 80% of our customer base is residential. So it's really these two categories. Everybody gets the $15 base charge. And then for the first 1,000 kilowatts, everybody pays about 9.2 cents, almost 9.3 cents a kilowatt for the first 1,000, and then it goes up to about 11.5 cents a kilowatt. So everything over the first 1,000 is 11.5 cents. And that's really the composite. That's how we break down our residential rate structure. I'm not going to get into the commercial demand side and all that stuff. It's a little bit more complex. But the residential, again, is pretty much the bread and butter of everything we do. Those rates, so when we talk about a rate increase or a rate decrease, this is where we would go, is adjusting the bait races and the base sales numbers. And that's where they're fixed this year. Fiscal year 26, we're kind of in the process of contemplating, do we need a rate increase effective October 1? I don't have the answer for that this evening, but as we go through this process, kind of our inclination is we might need to nudge up our base rates a little bit for many of the reasons that we have talked about. Inflationary issues primarily, and keeping pace with where the industry is at. So we'll pontificate on that a little bit more and dig into that more next month too when we talk about expenses. So with the rates, we've talked a little bit too about rate comparisons, and really this first 1,000 rate is the rule of thumb in the industry when you want to compare one utility to another utility. It's typically, what is that first 1,000 kilowatts sold at? So this next chart I put up, which pretty much shows all the power suppliers in the state of Florida. I know you can't read all those, but I'll point out the important stuff. This chart comes from the Florida Municipal Electric Agency. You can go to their website at publicpower.com. And that'll bring you right to the FMEA website. And then when you scroll through the options there, if you go to books and publications and you hit that click and then click down to rate comparison. And every month they update this comparison. So this comparison is the most recent one that they've done up at the top there, March 25. The next one will be coming out for April, probably in a couple of weeks. But it shows you kind of the base point of where we're at. So Leesburg is right here. This was us up to March 31st, 25. So our first 1,000 was 127.94. Honestly, I think that was a really super good number. The important lines on here are the average municipal rate is 126.86. So we were a little bit over the average, but then the other dotted, and so that was the average muni line, which we were just right about at. The other dotted line shows you the average IOU rate. So we're constantly comparing ourselves to other utilities as well as investor-owned utilities, which are Florida Power and Light, Florida Power and Light Northwest, which used to be, I think, was that, what was the name? That was Gulf Power, wasn't it? Up in the Panhandle. Then you have Florida Public Utilities, kind of another little utility. I think that's up in the Panhandle too. But then TECO and Duke. So really, when you talk about the major investor-owned utilities, it's Duke, Tampa Electric, and Florida Power. So you see where all their numbers are. They're actually, this is probably the first time in my career that I've really seen where the municipal utilities are doing much better than our investor-owned utilities. Typically, it's inverse of that. Typically, the investor-owned utilities are a little bit less expensive than us. So I put a couple of lines in here for reference because I wanted to show you, obviously, April 1, we increased the power cost adjustment. We had that discussion last month. We increased it the half a cent, which equals $5 per thousand. So our per thousand rate went up from 127 to 132. So FMEA hasn't caught it yet. That's why it's not on the chart. So I took the liberty of sticking in this yellow bar. And it puts us actually halfway between Chattahoochee and JEA. So even with the $5 or the increased power cost supply, I think Leesburg really can still boast of being a competitive supplier because, again, when you look back in our area, obviously you don't have a choice when it comes to power supply, but people watch, obviously, who's paying what. So even at the 132 rate, if you go see Duke, they're upwards of 160 for the first 1,000. So Leesburg is beating them by about $30. SECO and the city of Leesburg, SECO's not on this chart, but SECO stays SECO and Leesburg have been pretty equivalent the last couple of years. And then the only other, so in our region in Lake County, the power suppliers would be Duke, Leesburg, Seco, which is about the same as Leesburg, and then the other power supplier is Mount Dora. Mount Dora is actually really jamming right now. They're about 110 per thousand. And I'll just give you a quick reason why. When you start seeing these lower numbers, with the exception of a couple, those are cities that are typically buying short-term wholesale contracts. We're a long-term wholesale contract. So we're with FMPA, All Requirements Project. So once you sign up with that, you're pretty much, that's your duration of where you're going to buy power for the long haul, let's say. There have been a couple anomalies where cities have left the All Requirements Project, but they're few and far between, and it's typically difficult. And they've either gotten out of the power business altogether, like Vero Beach, who was in the All Requirements Project, or they've set up CROD, which is they hit a certain amount of purchasing that they have to take from the pool, and then above that number, they go somewhere else. So when you see cities like Alachua, New Smyrna Beach, Homestead, Mount Dora, those are all cities that are have short-term contracts, typically 1 to 5 years from typically one of they're buying capacity somewhere. They could be buying capacity energy from FMPA. They could be buying it from another investor-owned utility. I actually ran into Mount Dora the other day, and they're actually buying a spot contract from Duke. I need to say this because the question of how many your shoes is why aren't we doing that, right? Because it's dangerous. And it's dangerous because when you go out on the spot market, you typically you're doing really good or you're doing really bad. So you're getting energy super cheap, or there's no energy to get because there's no capacity. So now your price has gone out. And so now you're weathering the storm kind of alone. So this snapshot is at a time when the buying is good. I would suggest that as these contracts run out, you'll start seeing these cities move back up in line. So you're going to see a lot more variables in the pricing, up and down, as they can buy power on the market. And again, the market's not like today and then a new contract tomorrow. It's typically a short-term 3 to 5 year deal-ish. A couple of other examples, like Bartow on here. Bartow buys actually surplus energy from the All Requirements Project. That's a long story, but that contract is going to be coming to an end, so you'll see Bartow start rising. So typically, if you see cities kind of in our group, our price range of average, those are typically cities that are going to be in the All Requirements Project, or they're going to have more long-term strategies, so their pricing is more consistent. That's why you see the difference. You see the big increases on the investor-owned side these days because they're fighting the same issues that we are. Inflation. I would say that the two issues that they're fighting these days are probably more inflation and more storm recovery issues, where they've gone to the Public Service Commission to start increasing their power cost adjustments as well as their base rates. So I don't think you're going to see the investor-owned utilities prices come down. So that's bad, right? Because the customers aren't going to be seeing a break in the next couple of years in terms of their electric bills. But that's good because Leesburg comparatively is in a good position. Any questions on that chart?
What is a reasonable basis of comparison when you look at these? Is it, for instance, number of customers? So if we want to say, how does Leesburg compare to which other one of those utilities based on comparable customers to be able to see what's our rate versus their rate?
I don't think the comparison is taking a residential customer at 1,000 kilowatts. So it's an apples to apples comparison.
Okay.
I think your question gets more detailed because you're going to start getting into other issues like what their efficiencies are in far as system peaks and load issues that go into rate making. Maybe not so much on the investor-owned side, but on the city side, where if there becomes divisions in municipal utilities between, are you a generator of electricity or are you just a purchaser of electric utilities? So in the all requirements project, which we are, there's only
13.
there's 13, but there's only
35.
KUA is a generator.
Oh.
KUA is the only one, right?
Well, you got,
There used-
I think
Fort Pierce,
still has the
Lake Worth.
Keys have some.
The Keys
Sock
have
Island
to.
stuff.
So we're in the all requirements project, and you can kind of spec out these cities. And Kissimmee's in the all requirements project. Clewiston's in the all requirement project. Jack's Beach is in the all requirements. Moorhaven's in.
I think so,
I
yeah.
think so. Fort Pierce is in.
I think you're right,
Leesburg,
they're all grouped together.
Quincy, Newberry, Chattahoochee, Havana, Fort Meade, Key West. So in our own pool, we're right in the middle, which is representative of that. And so that's why your question's technical, because the way that the wholesale pricing structure is, which I'm not going to be the good one to provide that explanation, but we can bring FMPA into that. But really, the high-level approach there is the way the all requirements wholesale rate structure is set up is if you are a producer or a generator like KUA and you're giving power back to the group pays you for that. So they take those base rates and they end up getting a credit. So for some cities that have generation like KUA, you see that they have a significantly de minimis lower cost than us, but that's because their composite on their wholesale is different. So typically, we've come in and we've said we're buying power for $80 a megawatt. That's the average group. So KUA, who's in our group, is going to be buying it for less than that. We're going to be buying it for a little bit more. So that's how I try to answer your question. So it's an apples to apples comparison because it's all those utilities based on 1,000 kilowatt sales, but then how those individual cities get to lower, higher rates has a bunch of different matrix in. The one I explained, then their personnel costs, then their debt costs, then all those other things that go into the rate making. So all in all, I actually think Leesburg's been is kind of the middle of the bus. We weren't always at the middle of the bus. Probably the last 5-6 years, we've been consistently at the middle of the bus. And even if we need a rate increase regionally and statewide, we'll still be about the middle of the bus. Any questions on that? So I would say the takeaway from that is Leesburg's competitive. Leesburg is providing a reasonably good price to our customers based on that data, and that's the statewide data. Okay, so let me go to the typical utility bill. And as members of the advisory board, I think that the biggest thing to caution you is I got a $700 electric bill. Okay? Chances are that that's a city customer and they didn't get a $700 electric bill. So why? So this is the typical, what your typical bill looks like. And on this utility bill, there's 6 utilities on this bill. There's an electric bill, a gas bill, a sewer bill, a trash bill, a stormwater bill, and a water bill. And at the end, people look at that bottom number right down there. I think this one says $257. They're going to say, I got a $257 electric bill. We're going to say, no, you didn't. So you will get that a lot. So please keep that in mind when residents come to you and say, my electric bill was out of control. So you got to know who you're talking to when that happens, because we have 3 customers. We have the resident customer, we have the Fruitland Park customer, and we have the unincorporated customer. And all those people are going to be different. So people look at this bill, if they're the typical city customer, and they think that that bottom number is their electric bill. And it's not, and that's super important to point out. That's why I put all these arrows in there. So what does that look like if we break it down? So this bill, the typical city electric bill, so this part of this bill right here is this. And so what I wanted to show on this is the breakdown of the two portions of your electric bill. This is the electric charge and the base charge. So in this case, this customer only used 740 kilowatts, so below 1,000. So it actually does exist. So people actually use less than 1,000 kilowatts. And I'm really impressed with this one because I know these folks and I know exactly where they live. And I might have lived there. And that consumption is like really less than what I did while I was there. So they did something. But in any case, so that's their consumption. So you don't see this base sales go to the over 1,000 kW. So if you went over 1,000 kW, you're going to have three lines here. So everybody pays the base $15, and then the 9 cents over the usage, and that's your fixed cost. This is the portion of the bill, the fixed cost that the commission sets that you'll be recommending on during the budget process October 1st. The second cost is, of course, the bulk power cost. That's adjusted by the city manager, and right now we're at 2.5 cents. So obviously this is a bill that went out after April. So that is the 1/6 portion of the city, of what a city bill looks like. So I think that just is perspective of then how this comes back and hopefully ties some knots together for you. A Fruitland Park bill is going to now start looking more like if you're a typical customer in a municipal or municipality or a municipal corporation, you're going to get an individual bill on power. So this person's bill, they're going to go down the bottom and say, my power bill was $166. And I'm going to say, it was, with taxes. So let's talk about those breakdowns. So this is a Fruitland Park bill, and again, so this customer, again, look at that, 1,040 kilowatts, so that 1,000 thing is looking pretty good right now. So this is, actually this was a house in Leesburg, or this is not your bill, but it is a Fruitland Park bill. So you see the base bill of $15, then you see 1,000, then you see over 1,000, then you see your power cost adjustment. So their electric consumption portion of this bill was $138.56 for 1,040 kilowatts. So now let's start talking taxes. Municipal corporations in the state of Florida are permitted to levy two types of taxes: a franchise fee and a utility tax. Now I'm going to come back to the microphone here. It's over here. Not all cities do that. And that's important to know. Most cities do have some type of utility tax. Most cities use their utility taxing powers up to the maximum, which is 10%. Fruitland Park is one of those. And oh, by the way, I skipped this part of the bill, or maybe I stuck it somewhere else. This is back to the city. I did. On this, let me jump back to the city bill, because on the taxes part, you want to look at the bottom part of the bill where the taxes are. So on the city bill, all the utility taxes are at the end. So we hit you on electric, gas, trash, sewer, water, and then we hit all the taxes down at the bottom. Okay, so we have pretty much the same thing as Fruitland Park, but for the franchise fee. So everybody pays the governor the Florida gross receipts tax, which I think is like 2.3%. If you're in a municipal corporation, you typically have a utility tax that's for electric and water. I think it's electric, water, and gas, 10% of the sale. And then you have a franchise fee. And I think we talked a little bit about franchise fees, but I'll remind you real quick. So electric service is considered a municipal service by state statutes. And by state statutes, if it is a municipal service, the municipal corporation has the franchise to sell you that service. So what cities do across the state of Florida is on all types of services, whether they provide it or not, if they are not the direct supplier like the city of Leesburg, you will see on your bill a franchise fee and a tax. The purpose, they're different, even though they look the same, I understand that. But a tax is a tax, and a franchise fee is a franchise fee. So a franchise fee in this case is a charge to the entity who's providing the service in that municipal corporation, where the statutes say that they are the sole provider of that service. So it's the right to provide that service, A, and B, it's the right to use the public easements and rights of ways. So in this case, Fruitland Park pays a franchise fee to us, or we pay to them a franchise fee. So in Fruitland Park, there's an 8% franchise fee. The typical franchise fee, I'll note, is 6%. So Fruitland Park is 2% higher and is atypical. So in a Fruitland Park bill, you're going to get the city bill, then you're going to get your grocery receipts tax, the city tax, and then the franchise fee of 8%. So we have a service agreement. The city of Leesburg has a service agreement with the city of Fruitland Park. I think it's 3 5-year rolling franchise agreements. So where they renew that every year, and at the end of that agreement, we either A, renew it, or B, City of Fruitland Park has the right to buy the infrastructure, which typically we wouldn't advise Mr. Fruitland Park representative. But that's kind of the historic kind of pattern of what franchise fees have done. So other cities, like the city of Leesburg, also has a franchise fee agreement with Duke. So if you're not on the city system, the city of Leesburg will charge 6%. And most other cities in the state have that same franchise fee. Now, to make matters a little more complicated is the unincorporated bill. So the unincorporated bill looks similar to, it's actually a hybrid, because you may receive water and gas service from the city of Leesburg if you're in an unincorporated area. You may not, so it could vary. We're in Fruitland Park, the only city of Leesburg service that you would be getting is electric. So the difference now as we serve in the county is you still see the same use charges here. This particular customer though has the surge protector, so that's that code. So their bill was 122 for 861 kilowatts. But down at the bottom, you'll see the same gross receipts percentage usage that goes to the state, but instead of a franchise fee or a utility tax, you see the Leesburg surcharge. So if you are an unincorporated, and the counties, political subdivisions, don't have some of the same powers as municipal corporations, so the counties don't have a franchise fee, the counties don't have a utility tax, hence there is none. So what cities have done historically in the electric industry specifically is on customers that are in unincorporated areas, we have a surcharge in lieu of a tax. So that's a 10% surcharge, not a 10% tax. So where these go at the end of the day, just because this is the end of the billing segment of the presentation here, this $15 ends up in the city general fund. This $122 ends up in the electric fund. And this one has kind of a mirrored transaction when we start looking at the budget documents, because you will see in the electric revenues, the surcharge is blended into residential sales, or whatever sales category you are, but then you'll see a deduct in the expense line for the equivalent. Then in the general fund, you'll see a revenue and an expense for the surcharge. So the surcharge, this is actually not electric money. That's surcharge. That is electric money. That goes to operating and paying debt, paying supplies, paying the wholesale numbers. Any questions on that?
You said that surcharge is 10%.
Surcharge is 10%.
What am I missing? The math isn't working out there. Shouldn't it be like $12 and change? Is that-
It's 10%, yeah, because you got that extra $5 in there. So it's 10% on the customer charge and the use charges. So it's probably this plus this plus this gets you that. Not all of it, not this.
10, 20, no.
No, so 10% of
It's almost
122,
like 12.5%.
no, 10% of 122 would be
12, 20.
12. So why is that $15?
That's a good question, Al.
There's an answer.
I mean, even if you added the gross receipts, it still doesn't add up, and you wouldn't put a surcharge on the tax over
I'll double check.
Yeah, that's a little over 12%, just rough
It
numbers.
is. I will get you an answer on that.
Can you also go back real quickly to the franchise fee?
Yes.
For clarification on that. So the city of Fruitland Park sets the franchise fee.
Yes,
They're charging the utility. The utility is basically billing the customer back for whatever that amount is.
Yes.
Right? You said it's typically 6%, Fruitland Park is charging 8%. Any idea why there's a difference?
no. No.
Okay.
I can speculate if you want me to speculate, but the honest answer is no. I don't know why Fruitland Park does that.
Okay.
Do you want me to speculate?
Has that been pretty consistent, that 8%?
Fruitland Park has always been 8%. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're 6% Wildwood.
We're 5% in Wildwood, but we don't have electric there.
Yeah,
No.
St. Catherine is Wildwood,
Oh, are we 6% there?
pretty sure.
That's the village's
It's
influence.
the villages of St. Catherine, which is in Wildwood.
I'll go look at those Wildwood bills.
So when you say it's typically 6%, are you just throwing out basically a statewide average, or?
No, statewide, okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's a good question. I don't know how the number of 6% came into being. But if you look at every municipal corporation's franchise agreement with their supplier, it's 6%. And it's been that way forever. I don't know what the formula was to say our franchise is worth 6%. Probably my guess is cities would do as much as they can to generate as much revenue as they can, and that was the level of non-pushback. Like that's as much as they could get, because the non-municipal utilities, including the municipal utilities, don't like to have the franchise because people see it as an adder onto the electric bill, right? And that's not the true cost of electric because the city is doing this quote-unquote tax on you. So my guess is when cities started getting out of the electric business, and so in Florida what we saw is back in the 60s and probably the late 50s, as Florida became more urbanized, cities started getting out of the electric business and they started franchising it to whoever the closest or territorial provider was. And when they signed off on those agreements, they kept the 6%. So there's a few oddballs. I know of two. Leesburg happens to have both of them. Fruitland Park is 8%. That's probably the amount that Fruitland Park wanted because they wanted to derive a certain amount of revenue in the general fund from franchising it, and that was the number they historically came. And then it's like a drug. Once you get used to that amount, you don't go back. Without, ramifications and, that kind of thing. So it's always been 8%. But that's, I would wager that you won't see 8% anywhere else in the state of Florida.
To be clear, though, that is a dollar for dollar transfer. Like Leesburg is not upcharging that 8%.
That is a dollar for dollar transfer. So on this Fruitland Park bill, that $12.75 that's in there, $12.75 goes to Fruitland Park. We might keep a percentage of that But it's like an administrative fee, it's like pretty minimal. But don't hold me to the, I'll have to look into that too. Because I think Duke keeps a minor percentage from our franchise fees. So we might have a small piece in there. But I'm gonna say 99% of that $12.75 is going to Fruitland Park. I'm looking at the wrong number, 1137. Then you mentioned the 5% franchise fee. We have the villages of Catherine, which is in the city of Wildwood in Sumter County. My guess is and I don't remember how we did that, but it's probably villages influence. When we started providing utility services in Sumter's, the villages wanted to do it at 5% instead of 6%. So the villages kind of was instrumental in orchestrating all this, and so everybody capitulated to 5 versus 6.
Can I ask as a favor, maybe for the next meeting?
You want me to give you an explanation?
The numbers aren't working. Like, that's not, the Fruitland Park tax is not 9%.
Is that the number you coming up with?
And the franchise fee is not 8%.
I'll get you an answer.
Would you please?
Yeah.
Just kind of curious.
Yep.
Before I.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
I will get you an answer.
One of the things, Al, just to add on there with the bill that we have with gas, electric, sewer, et cetera, GRU going through all their pains, with the state, is revising their bill so the GRU bill will just have electric and not be coupled with the city of Gainesville, which increases the cost for the city of Gainesville, having to do a separate bill.
So everybody's a little bit different there as far as process of billing. Any questions on the billing section before I move on? I owe you an answer on the fuzzy math. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna jump into the power cost adjustment now. So the first portion of the presentation kind of show you where our rate structure is, and we're kind of hanging in there, how it's disseminated in the form of the bills. And so kind of the next component into revenue is our power cost adjustment. And the whole purpose of this chart, if you go to our website, this information's on there. So you go to the city's website, leesburgflorida.gov, then go up to the very top, it's electric rate watch, click on that, and then we'll start showing you all the stuff. And this is the updated. So this bigger box is kind of the important one for the discussion. This bigger box, this smaller box, which you can't read, it's kind of everything we're comparing it at. What our base rate is, what the power cost adjustment is, what our recovery is, what our balances are, yada, yada, yada. So we changed this year just to kind of show you our estimated versus actual in each of the primary categories that make up how we get to the power cost adjustment. So the first one is wholesale costs from F&PA. So this would be, here are the months, I lopped off the months here, but this is October, November, December, January, February, March, April, right, all the way through the end of the fiscal year. So we anticipated our bill from F&PA was going to be about $46 million this year. So here's where we're over under on our estimates, and actually we're actually pretty good. So we were up $1 million, or so you see where we're at here. So then we come into our recoveries. We anticipated, so October was actually kind of a bad month. So even though we paid less than we anticipated, we didn't recover, we didn't over. So black is an over recovery, meaning we charged too much. An under recovery, meaning red, meaning we didn't charge enough. So all things being equal, we'd like to see this 0, but you're never gonna hit that. So we try to smooth it out. So even though our power bill was down by $200,000, we didn't over recover as much as we thought. So now that's going to go into the data of what did we peak at that month, where and all sorts of other matrix go in there as to why was our recovery a little bit different than anticipated. So again, and then at the end we want to keep $3 million in the power cost reserve account. So this chart then shows you kind of what we anticipated. So at the end of October, we thought we were gonna have about 4.1, we had 3.6. But then we made it up. Look, in November, we had a great November month. And that was the month where we had that big credit coming back from FPA. Our energy rate went really low that month, is why we ended up over recovering by that. So when we under recover, that goes boom, it's going right back to the customer, because it enables to keep our bill more steady. So then, these are kind of the comparisons. So by the end of the first quarter, we thought we were gonna have about 4 million in the power reserve account, and we had 4.05, so we're only about 40 grand off. So that looked pretty good. So January was hard on us, but February was good. So you kind of see how we anticipated good, bad months, right? And then we kind of balance out again in the summer. Summer's typically a good month because we have high sales, high consumption. Even though we peak in the summer, that we keep up with the kilowatt usage. So all things being equal, what all of this means really in English is we're only about 200 grand off of our projection, which in that account is actually a really good number. So we'll see what April does. We should have our April numbers. Today's the 5th. So we should have our April numbers. Typically we get our numbers middle of the month. So we should have our April numbers in the middle of the month, this month for April. So the purpose of this is to say we're pretty much right on course where we anticipated with the power cost adjustment. So we'll see how that goes. But that's an important part of rate making, because we do account for it as a revenue, and it does affect your bottom line when you pay the bill. And typically, if we were going for a rate increase my hope was maybe we could bring the power cost adjustment down in the fall, and then if your base rate goes up a little bit, you're gonna have a net neutral increase in your bill, but the city would have extra revenue to start covering some expenses in the electric fund. That's to be determined, but kind of one of the mechanisms we're going to be looking at. So the next, I meant to make a copy of that all for you, but that's our revenue numbers. You can't see them. My apologies again on that. But $75 million is what we anticipate as a revenue right now. And that's bottom line. So everything basic in that number. So the total number down here is 75.9. Okay. These charts in here is all the residential, or all the customer classes, all charges for services, energy out, money in. So 75.9 million is what that says. That number says 75.3. Actually, it says 75.394049 is what that is. So basically, what that's 99 math. Mark, what's the math on that? It's like about 99%.
Pretty close.
So 99% of all the electric fund money comes from charges for services. We have some other stuff in here: interest revenues, recovery, blah blah blah, some miscellaneous stuff. But pretty much everything is coming from that charges for services, and the primary charges for services, residential, and we have a couple of big commercial customers. With that, there's kind of a super easy formula that we use to come up and to figure out where our overall revenues are going to be. And that formula is 60% of the revenue is your wholesale costs. So you can work back into your revenue number, and then all of these numbers give us enough historic trends that we can kind of proportionalize each one of those lines. Because our commercial and our residential counts and our industrial counts, they're all historically they're all similar, so it really becomes a pattern of ratios. And if you can figure out what our wholesale number is going to be, then you can back into what our revenue stream is going to be, and then you take that revenue number and then you break it down over the course of these. And this year, although you can't see these numbers, we're pretty much spot on. But then we break it down month by month by month. So if you take a fiscal year and you divide it, you're supposed to bring like 12.2% in each year, right? 12.2 times 12 gets you your 100% of revenue. But our months are pretty historic, so we know in January we should capture 7% of our revenue. In July, we should capture 15%. And so then we break those comparisons down. I didn't bring those for you today because I thought it'd just get too complicated and fuzzy. But we're starting out the fiscal year 26, thinking we'll probably bring in about 75.1 million. So I threw in this chart because this looks similar to the power cost adjustment chart I showed you in the past, but this chart I'm just focusing in on what our wholesale cost numbers are. So that number right there is this is our projection from FMPA for fiscal year 25, which goes from October till September, starts October 1. They're projecting that our costs are going to be about 45 million bucks. So that's how we start setting our revenues. Any questions on that? You guys are easy there. Okay, so we're looking at moving into, when we talk next month and we break it down into expenses, hopefully expenses will be 75.113 million. So that's to be determined next month. Brad's still putting together his expenses. I think they're polishing it off with Brandy tomorrow, and then it'll be in front of me and then back to you guys by June. And then we'll really start breaking it down into some more details. So before I go to the next slide, so you have a feel for it. So we're looking at where our rate structure is. We're looking at where our power supply cost number is and how much cash we have there at 3 million. So the next kind of component is, how are we doing overall with our cash, which is this chart. So the past couple of years, I've been a little bit worried about the electric fund. So this chart is really the composition of where our unreserved electric cash is. So if you go back kind of to COVID, we were sitting around 20 million. And then kind of as we came out of COVID, that's kind of where we saw inflation start to hit us. So the utility absorbed those costs. Probably about March of 23 is when I started yelling at Brad to spend less. And so you see, Brad, don't look at this. We started to catch up here probably in this fiscal year. I would ultimately like to see this number sit around 15 million. The question becomes, where should it sit? And that's really anybody's rule of thought there. The Government Finance Officers Association says 90 days of operating capital. What's FMPA's? FMPA's 90-day operating capital. They want in cash. And so probably somewhere between, but what we don't want to see the ups and downs, right? We want to see steady cash just sitting in there so we use it if we need to. And typically where we're going to use that is in case of a storm, and then we see it go back. And in storms, we see our cash depleted typically in the neighborhood of 1 to 3 million bucks, depending on where that happens. 90 days cash for the general fund is 75 million times 25%. What's that number? It's like, I think it's like 9.
What's the number?
75 million.
12, you said?
Just do 25%.
8.75?
9 million.
I'm sorry, 18.75?
18. Okay, so it's going to be 25% without power cost is where we get that number from. So this chart shows you where we're at as far as that's the GFOA 90-day cash number. So as long as we're over it, and that's about the $9 million mark. So we're sitting right now about just about 11. So the couple things on this chart, the blue shows renewal and replacement. The green shows reserve cash. There's not a lot of difference functionally at your level between the blue and the green bar. That's pretty much all free cash. The difference is the depreciation number is what becomes the renewal and replacement number, so that goes blue. But they function for Brad as far as spendability the same. But blue, the concept is to build your cash through renewal and replacement. So we try to keep a beat on what that is from our depreciation entries, and then what's left over from when Brad doesn't spend. So you see the last quarter here, we've been actually doing pretty good and starting to catch up. This line here, this orange in the chart, those are our encumbrances. So this is why Brad is going to be looking at this number thinking $11 million, I'm doing really good. I'm going to be looking at this number and saying, you're not there yet. So those are the encumbered expenses. So there's about $6 million of encumbered expenses that we were scheduled to spend but haven't spent yet. So we're not sitting at 11, we're really sitting at 7. But that number is not gonna all go out the door at once. And so a lot of those encumbrances, the greatest example of these encumbrances right now are the subdivision agreements that Brad has signed off on, or now the city commission. So what's that one in Fruitland Park's name?
Fruitland Park is Arbor Park.
So Arbor Parks is the big subdivision off Euclid Road, and actually they're coming in off Martin Luther King. So in Leesburg, so they're actually coming off of Leesburg Road to go into the Fruitland Park subdivision. They worked all that out with us. So that's a pretty big subdivision. I think it's
163.
163 houses.
Phase 1.
At phase 1, yeah, I thought it was like 500 total.
Yeah, it's going to go all the way to 468. But
So
right now, phase 1 is 163.
That's a big one. So we've done the first phase of our portions of our expense. So that's the expense where we do these developer agreements. We haven't done the developer agreement with you all. We'll do that after the budget. Maybe we'll do that in the summer when we have nothing else to talk about. But we have a cost when the utility has a cost when we build a subdivision, and that cost we typically think we're going to return our investment in 4 years. So we've got wires and hardware and poles and whatever to put in, and that's what's represented in this yellow box. The auditors do look at us. Our bond, or not our auditors, but the rating firms look at us on a quarterly basis. They call us monthly. We did just get downgraded. I think we went from an A to an A minus. So it's not a huge, significant downgrade, but if we were going out to shop for debt, then we would see probably that kind of downgrade is literally a couple points. So a couple of points it's not a huge increase if we were going to borrow, but we don't like to see obviously our ratings go down. So there's really a balance between where we want our cash flow, and the rating firms did notice. They noticed the drop, and that was the biggest reason they downgraded us from the A to the A minus. So there's a happy medium there where that needs to sit. And my inclination is that number, we're getting better, but I'd like to see that number really solidify at 15 million. So that's why, kind of as we move into this fiscal year, we really need to talk about rate structure. If this number continues to increase, and remember, so this is through February, that's another component of finishing off all the expenses for February. So we talked about expenses for wholesale purchasing, which is a couple months ahead, or almost pretty close to real time. But the actual expenditures that the department makes, paying personnel, paying for equipment, that takes accounting, they're probably, we're in May, not quite 90 days to catch up with that. So I do anticipate that February number is going to hold steady-ish, but we don't know until all the accountants kind of finish off Brad's books. So I think that's good news. So put all those things in the hopper for our revenues. We're probably looking at the electric fund being around 75 million. We need to look at Brad's expenses and shift through those to see, kind of grade the wants and needs, and then go back and see where we're at in terms of the rate structure. because in the next couple months is when we'll really put the formulas together, working with you all to determine whether we keep the rate where it's at or whether we might need an increase for October 1. With that,
Is everything? I guess my only question is, and without getting into a conversation about politics, how might tariffs impact expenses moving forward on some of your materials and equipment and things like that?
That's going to be, it's going to be like your car, you know, all those metals and all the steels and all the minerals, copper and those type of things, you know, it's to be determined. So we're just starting to see that now in the economy, right? So the tariffs went into effect, was it last month or so? And so now we're starting to see the impacts on that. In the housing market, you know, they're saying the slowdown in the housing sales is due to tariffs catching up. Auto industry is saying the same thing. So in the months to come, that could, you know, long story short, where we're going to see it is that chart right there. So if those pricings on meters and wire and poles and all those things start to increase because of tariff, we're going to see unexpected expenses, and we're going to start seeing the electric department expenses exceeding our estimates because of that. So
Which will eventually get passed on to the customer.
yeah.
Is there any strategy or an opportunity to buy now, stock up on materials?
We probably missed that bus to a degree, and then that becomes the next question of how much do you want to stock up on and spend cash to put in the barn while it's not earning. So I think we've got a good blend of that. In fact, it's probably where we disagree a little bit, because Brad likes to sit on materials more than I do, because I rather see it in cash. He rather see it in materials. And our material number is up. Typically, our warehouse number used to hang around 2 to 4 million in assets. Now we're hanging around 6 to 8. And so we try to manage that. The other thing about buying ahead of time too is lead times. Some of these things are just hard to get. So we try to keep stuff on hand as much as we can and then reorder it as we go. So I think Brad does a pretty good job of that. The tariffs is another added level of frustration. Hopefully that balances out in the future, if the president's correct. But I wouldn't go on a spending spree to stock up on stuff now.
Okay.
Because it's going to hit us there with pushing out cash, and it sits in the barn. And then when do we use it? So, and then when the storm comes, so if we took, you know, we're sitting on really, I wouldn't say we're sitting on 11 million, I'd say we're sitting closer to 7 million. So how much of that 7 are we going to hit? You know, we're going to spend 5, 6, 7 of that, and then when we get hit with the storm in the summertime. So ultimately it goes back to the customer, and that's what you see the investor owns doing too. So most of these costs are getting passed back on to the customers.
Okay.
So I really think our job is to contain as much of it as we can. Ultimately, we're probably going to have to increase a little bit. What that number is, I don't know. I would venture to say it's going to be from 0 to 10% increase. I don't think 10. I just don't want to say yet till we start seeing Brad's numbers and seeing what this next quarter does and seeing how it impacts cash.
Okay.
To your point, we're still pulling on inventory because of the, you know, lead times went to 2 years on stuff we used to get in 7 weeks. So, you know, we do have some inventory we're leaning on, but, you know, I see 6, 7, 8 months down the road, if all these things hit, that, you know, that thing that bulk that we built on that's sitting in the warehouse, we're gonna keep pulling from. But eventually, we're gonna have to start buying again, and those higher costs are, you know, we can't absorb it much longer. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think we've been doing a really good job of absorbing those costs. And go back to that very first slide. I'll go here. How do we get back there? I'll just tell you what it was. So our rate right now, 132.95. I think that's what that number was.
Yeah.
So 13 years ago, 13, is it 13? In 13, when I first came here, our rate was 133, going up 5% to 142. And so we stopped that last increase and we actually went down. So, and we stayed, so I don't know, so I've been here 11 plus years now, so we're lower than we were 11 plus years ago. Who else has done that? So I think, that's something I think folks need to remember as well. So even if we go up, say 5%, we're going to be at that 142-ish level, which is still pretty competitive and just barely above where we were in 2013. So I think we've done a pretty good job controlling the rate as much as possible. With some, especially these last 3 or 4 years have just been super crazy.
It might have been on your fuzzy P&L sheet up there, but is the cash on hand is invested somewhere somehow, earning something?
Yeah, it's bank notes. I don't know what the number, it's not huge. We've been doing better. Maybe we get 1 or 2%. But that's not a great number, right? But it's public money. But that number's been as great as 5 to 6%. And then when interest rates were down, of course, I mean,
Right.
it cost money to have, it cost you money to have a secured account, right? Not a lot, but a couple points. And so now where we're back in that 1 or 2% range, we've been there for the last couple of years, we're actually seeing our interest on investment numbers go up. So when we do get the budget numbers out to you, look at that one in the revenue line, and you'll see a little bit of that trend. But most everything is all secured and nothing crazy, so, but making decent numbers.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Al. It's very good. Roll call, Mark.
Nothing else, thank you.
Nothing? Good. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion?
Stand adjourned.